Welcome back to Pivot Points. Today we're stepping back from the individual stories to explore the deeper themes that emerged across our conversations with some of the world's most fascinating leaders. What we found is that modern leadership isn't shaped by perfect plans. It's shaped by pivotal moments, by adversity, by curiosity, and ultimately by authenticity. Let's revisit the turning points that shaped them. Let's begin where every great leadership story truly starts, with a career path that didn't go to plan. If there's one pattern that unites our guests, it's this. None of them set out to become CEOs. Their journeys zigged and they zagged through unexpected opportunities, harsh setbacks, and courageous leaps into the unknown. These leaders weren't following a blueprint. They were learning to trust the moments that redirected them. Here are some of those pivotal turns. In this first clip, Christian Mazzi takes us inside the toughest inflection point of his life, stepping away from a hard-won medical career to enter the uncertain, high-stakes world of business.
In medicine, it's a very regimented journey that you go through in the study of medicine and the training of medicine. And you decide which specialty you're going to pursue, but once you're in it, you're kind of pursuing a very sort of strict set of steps along the way. And I was going through that journey, and I got to sort of that point where I was transitioning to my next chapter of training. And this is a phase of training where you are very much tied to they call it an attending. Right, an individual who takes you under their wing and trains you in a specific subject. And I was getting ready to do my next step with a gentleman called Don Baim, a very famous cardiologist. And he sat me down at one point and he said, I don't think you're in it. I don't think you are ready. Why don't you take some time off and come back? And he sort of made me understand that the position would still be there. But, at the time, if you're a young guy trying to make your way through this journey and fighting really hard and being really excited about what you got, to be told, hold off for a little while was probably the biggest slap in the face I could have ever gotten by anybody at the time. But credit to him, he kind of had seen that there was something that I needed to explore in order to commit. And so he sort of gave me this year off. And that was a period of time where, I actually said, well, let me go and do something completely different that gives me perspective. And that's when I went to business school. I found a program that allowed me to do it sort of in 1 year time in Paris, and did that, met my wife there, which is double benefit.
You owe this gentleman a lot.
Yes, I do. Yeah, he's really sort of had an impact on my life. So look, during that period of time, what was funny is during that period of time, he also made the transition from medicine to business.
Wow.
But yeah, so he was already thinking about making the move. But it was unbeknownst to me, I sort of, on the back of the MBA, kind of saw a world that I was fascinated by, which was the business of medicine. And I was fascinated by the impact one could have, the decisions one could make, the innovation that sat behind it. And I said, well, I want to learn this. And that was the pivotal moment when I said, let me not go back right away. I'll do that for a couple of years. And that was 2002. So it's been a little bit longer than 2 years.
Any regrets or?
Occasionally, I do miss the practice of medicine occasionally, where I do feel like that clinical contact is very important. But I do get that in my current role. Ironically, as a CEO, you are much closer to the action, like the front line. If you do things right, I think, you're much closer to the front line. So where your customers are practicing medicine, you need to be there.
Next up, we have Steinar Sønsteby, who made the kind of decision that separates conventional careers from strategic ones. Against the advice of his father, and the safety of a free, world-class education in Norway, he chooses an expensive, uncertain path in the United States. It's a calculated leap that reshapes his worldview, his leadership, and ultimately the scale of the companies he leads.
So one of the really early things was that I didn't want to go to school in Norway. I wanted to see the world. Germany was a possibility, UK was a possibility, but I jumped over the pond to University of Utah in Salt Lake, mostly because it's a great place to downhill, but it's also a school that are known in Norway a little bit. And so that absolutely changed my perspective on a lot of things in the world.
I mean, that's a brave thing to do. Most people stay in their own country and go to university in their own country. That would have been quite a pioneering thing back then, I would have thought.
Yeah, and it's hard to even remember how the world was, you know?
Yeah.
No smartphones, no internet, very hard to communicate back. One of the toughest decisions actually was that my dad wanted me to go to the prime engineering school in Norway, which were free because we have free education in Norway. And so I chose to go to expensive university in the US against, my mentor and my father's advice, and had to pay for the whole thing myself. So it was not an easy thing, but it was the right thing when I look back.
Yeah, and what drove you to do that? Because that's clearly a first pivotal, really big pivotal moment to do all of that and have the strength of will to follow that through.
I still remember a little bit of the first weeks. The language was difficult. The culture was very difficult. I remember once at campus, there was a guy I was talking to, a random guy, and he said, in the end of the conversation, he said, "I'll call you," which is a polite way of ending a conversation in the US. And I stopped him and I said, "How can you do that? You don't have my phone number." It's like learning that culture are different and languages and everything. So I think actually my military service what made me confident that I could do things that I didn't think I could before. And I think that was instrumental for me to take that decision. It wasn't the easy decision, but I took it. And I think the confidence from the military service was part of that.
In this next segment, you'll hear Sarah Walker-Smith describe her red dress moment, a single high-stakes decision that reset the trajectory of her leadership. It's not just about how you lead, but how you show up to do so that matters.
I never used to pick up the phone to headhunters, but they just caught me on a particularly bad moment. And I went through a 6-month process, but I put myself into the process because I thought I might learn something, never thinking in a million years I'd get the job. And at the end of that 6 months, I was the last person standing. So that's how I got the job. But the bigger point, and definitely a pivot point for me, was deciding whether to take it or not. And in terms of deciding whether to take it or not, I had to really search deep about purpose. This was 6 years ago I took this job, and I was in my late 40s at the time. So I had to really think, okay, what am I all about? What is my purpose? What do I want to do? So that was a really big point for me. And when I got the job, having been through this 6-month process, lots of tests, lots of interviews, the very final day in the process was a final presentation to the board, essentially. And at that point, down to about 3 people. And I remember being up half the night before thinking my imposter syndrome had gone berserk, thinking this little girl from a council estate in Lincoln should not be in this position. And I'd done a very chief executive type presentation, whatever one of those is, and I got my black suit ready and I was going to put my hair up, and I just had this epiphany in the middle of the night where I thought, no, that's not who you are. So I wore a red dress, took my hair down, and did only a few slides, mostly of pictures, of which one of them was a picture of a 5-year-old ballerina, and I told an anecdote. And for me, that was absolutely a pivotal moment in my career, because not only did I get the job, but probably more importantly, I got it authentically, which meant I could then show up as me and lead in the way that I'd probably not been able to. If I think about my career up to that point, I'd always been hiding something or stifling something, and I kind of got to show up as me for the first time. So that was a really pivotal point, not getting the job, but deciding to take it.
Those moments weren't tidy, they weren't predictable. They became the foundation of extraordinary leadership journeys. From those twists and turns, we move naturally into our next theme, adversity. Every leader this season carried a story of hardship, moments of rejection, instability, cultural barriers, or self-doubt. But instead of stopping them, adversity shaped them. It strengthened their resilience. It sharpened their perspective. In this next clip, Steinar Sønsteby explains why his real MBA didn't come from a classroom. It came from 2 years of military service, leading under pressure, making decisions with incomplete information, and being accountable for other people.
So I think one of the moments that kind of changed a little bit of my life was going to military service and officer school at a young age. I've always thought back, sometimes you don't understand when you're in the moment, but looking back, I think I grew up in those 2 years in the military. It was also the first time I really understood the power of leaders and leadership. Of course, on a very ground level, being a chief of 5 or maybe 10 people in a very stressful situation, it kind of puts you on the spot.
And how old were you when you did that?
So I was 19 when I got in, and I was immature. I was a very young for my age. So I always think that I needed those 2 years.
Sarah Walker-Smith takes us back to a brutal pivotal moment most leaders never face, the night of her 18th birthday, when she was effectively made homeless. A shock that became a blueprint for her resilience and resourcefulness under extreme pressure.
Little me was brought up by my mum, who was a single parent, and spent a lot of time from the age of about 10 looking after my sister, who's about 5.5 years younger than me. And I spent, because we didn't have a lot, I think my imagination got carried away. So I used to sit in the cupboard, actually the cupboard above the stairs rather than the cupboard under the stairs, like Harry Potter. I used to write musicals, I used to write plays, and I think I lived my life in this imaginary world. So from a very young age, I wanted to be an actor. And I was unbelievably lucky that I got a place at drama school. I had a Saturday job. I could only afford to audition at 2 places, and I got in at both of them. And I was due to go. And then on my 18th birthday, not my mum's fault at all, but she had a bit of a breakdown and she asked me to leave home. She basically threw me out of home is overly dramatic. She was very calm. She said, you just need to go, and you need to go right now. So I then found myself living in the middle of my A-levels, living in a quite horrible, mouldy bedsit without any heating. And it was pretty grim when I look back on it. I used to keep milk on the windowsill to keep it cool because I didn't have a fridge or a kitchen or anything like that. No heating. It was pretty awful. And at that point, I think, quite frankly, I rethought this whole plan of being an actress. And I just went to the local job centre and said, I need a job. And they were obviously looking alphabetically down the list. And the first thing they saw was accountants. So they sent me off to a little local firm of accountants in Lincoln, a lovely little firm called Wright Bygar & Co. And I spent a few months working for them. And they said, you really do need to think about becoming a chartered accountant. And I was like, well, I don't even know what that is, but okay, I'll give it a shot. So they sent me off to Nottingham Trent Uni, which is another pivotal point in my life and career, actually. We'll come back to Nottingham Trent probably. And while I was there, I got picked up by Touche Ross as part of their trainee graduate program. So then found myself working for one of the big accountants, obviously became Deloitte. So suddenly catapulted from council estate on Lincoln, or mouldy flat in Lincoln city centre, mouldy bedsit rather, into working for one of the large accountancy firms. And I qualified as a chartered accountant from that. So yes, I did qualify quite early. And then from that, I became a manager at PwC. And again, because I'd gone a more direct route, I was one of the youngest managers at PwC. So absolutely no plan whatsoever. And if you'd asked me when I was a child, was I going to qualify as a chartered accountant, I would have probably rather eaten my left arm, quite frankly. But I did love it. I loved the people side of it. It was such a brilliant a brilliant grounding, going to see lots of different businesses, understanding their business models, understanding what made them tick. And I learned so much about business as a result of being an auditor, but it was not an aspiration to be an auditor. And I went from there to work at Boots the Chemist. And then from Boots the Chemist, I ended up in another law firm before I came to this one. So like I say, it's been a very weird career, I think.
It's powerful to hear how those experiences hardened their resolve and prepared them for the weight of leadership still to come. Our next theme marks a turning point for every leader. The moment they realised that leadership wasn't about what they knew, it was about the people they served. No matter how technical their background, medicine, law, engineering, finance, their success as CEOs came from emotional intelligence, communication, and earning trust. That built them the respect that they needed for leadership. In their stories, you hear the shift from individual contributor to culture shaper, from doer to leader. In every transformation, strategy lives or dies in the way it's communicated. Christian Mazzi breaks down how communication doesn't just transmit culture, but actively creates it.
These are the lessons I've learned, not only at that sort of moment in time, but later on throughout the journey, was the importance of having that real clarity of communication and having a real sense of transmitting where you're going with something and where you want to go, what your vision is. And that just becomes bigger and bigger as you go from, the vision for that specific project to the vision for that division, for the company, for the industry. But the challenge never changes in the sense that the premium one puts on the ability to transmit that clarity, that unambiguity, is very, very high. And in an environment where, you have people that are very similar to you, have similar background, you have similar upbringing, it's a relatively easy bar. But when you move to a different sort of level, when you have people of very different backgrounds, different cultures, different skill sets, different functions, that premium for clarity becomes very, very high.
Yeah.
Spend time learning that. Don't get frustrated with the fact that you have to repeat something 5,000 times, because that's the way you communicate. That's the way you transmit the message.
Yeah.
And that's what it takes.
In this next clip, Matt Wenger challenges one of the most dangerous habits in leadership, spending all your time on the plan and not nearly enough on the people. It takes an awful lot of time and effort to get to world class.
And it's really, really fascinating, the mindset change that you have to go through if you are going to do it right. And so if I were to take my early years as an artist, I did impose more of my view on, play it like this or play it like, I would write sometimes all the parts and then ask the guys to play the parts. And those songs were never as good as the ones where it was like, hey, here's a riff. What would you do with that? Right. And so, but, you don't learn always all that quick as a teenager, and you still got a little bit of that ego and it's my idea kind of thing going on. And then I was taking a directing course with a gentleman by the name of Harvey Miller, who was had been a Broadway director and come to Victoria to retire. Great, fantastic guy. And my theater project. So I was, I came into this directing course, and the first few plays that I directed were, and you had to direct these kind of short snippets. And they were just awful. Like, it was maybe 15 or 20 minutes. And my plays were really bad. And then what I would do is, after I had a bad one, I would study the script even harder. And then I would come back and I would then get my next cast, and I would work with them on the next, script, and then work on that. And then try to tell them all what they had to do. And then that one was worse. And then my next play, I studied the script even harder. And so by the time I had to do my full feature, which was Streetcar Named Desire, which is a really tough play to direct well anyway. My directing professor came in, and I was sitting at the back of my theater after my last disaster, just sitting there in the dark, just like, oh my God, like I'm really bad at this. And he came walking in, and he hadn't really spoken much to me after my kind of 3 or 4 previous bad plays. And he sat down beside me and he says, what'd you think of that? And I said, oh my God, Harvey, it was just awful. He's like, I went off for a little bit and he let me kind of run. And then he's just like, how long did you spend studying the script? And that's when I went, because like as though it was so bad because I didn't study the script hard enough, right? And so I was just like, I spent 200 hours studying the script and looking at all my notes, and I was scrambling in the dark trying to show him all my notes were everywhere. And he just goes, "How long did you spend casting?" And I went, I don't know, an hour. It was a lunchtime thing. I said, "Streetcar Named Desire, anybody?" And I said, you. Okay, great. He's just like, "Okay, I want you to flip it. I want you to." I wasn't Streetcar Named Desire, the previous one, but anyway, he said, "I want you to flip it." I said, "Flip it? What do you mean?" He says, "Whatever time you spent studying the script, I want you to spend casting, and whatever time you spent casting, I want you to spend studying the script. Will you promise me you'll do that?" And I went, "You've got to be kidding me. That would mean I have like an hour or two to study the script. Like, how am I going to do a Streetcar Named Desire?" He says, "Just do it." I'm like, okay. So I did it. So I got to read the screenplay or the stage play once. And then I just spent the rest of the time casting. And it was the most beautiful experience I've ever had in my life, because I had to ask, what would you do with this?
Yeah.
And then I found one person. I go, "Oh my God, I never thought about that. Stanley could be just like that." And then I go, "Okay, how do I find the right Blanche for that Stanley?" And then I went around and had to find the right Blanche for the Stanley. And so the play went off. It was a massive success. Massive. It was pretty good. Like, it wasn't awful, I guess. And afterwards, he came up and he's just like, patting me on the back. He says, that was fantastic. Great job. And I said, "Harvey, I did nothing." He's just like, pointed out. He was just like, as to say, like, think about that. But did you really do nothing? And this is a long story, but it goes along with what you're talking about the difference between being the idea guy who feels you have to like champion, and this is the idea, and this is how this works, and this is how this works, and this is how it works, and cling to all the decisions and cling to all, and having to think that you have to know everything. They have to figure everything out, to being to having that kind of further, that little bit of distance from it, having that idea, that vision of what would be great and what we kind of need, and then getting other people excited about that shared vision, and then getting people that lined up and that played off each other really well to then actually, execute and deliver.
Everyone wants a seat at the top table, but few understand the cost. In this clip, Steinar Sønsteby breaks down the loneliness of ultimate responsibility. What changes when you move from being one of the leaders to being the leader, and how the shift forces you to think one giant leap ahead of everyone else.
I have this conversation sometimes with people that we are giving new positions internally, because it doesn't only happen when you take the step into the role as CEO. We are organized in countries. So, when someone are promoted to become a country leader, country manager, some of that actually happens because you're not by yourself, but you're more by yourself. You're more lonely. But back to your question, Dave, it's a huge difference to be the one or be one of the ones. It's lonely. It's a lot of commitment of time and effort. It's not for everybody. And, I give it my all. I've given my life. I'm 63 years old now. I've been half my life doing this. And it's so much fun. But the responsibility never leaves, it's 24/7. And I think that is a huge difference. I sometimes try to describe it to myself as I have to remember I am one mountain further on my walk in the mountains. In Norway, we walk in the mountains a lot. And so I see and feel and know a little bit more all the time. And that is what I think puts the pressure on you.
In a world where strategy is often reduced to spreadsheets and slide decks, we underestimate the most powerful cultural force inside any organisation: basic human warmth. As CEO of the Royal Albert Hall, James Ainscough argues that culture doesn't change because of slogans or town halls, but because leaders choose to show up with real humanity, especially when the pressure is highest.
Culture is everything, isn't it? And I guess a bit like in the way that my career is a random walk, I often feel like the cultures I've worked in have been as much a function of randomness as deliberate leadership. But specifically at the Hall, the culture is all about empowerment. In other words, there's nobody, chief exec or directors or even heads of department, who can be making all decisions all the time. So yeah, we're a 24/7 organization. We have more people working in the building between 5 p.m. and 5 a.m. than we do during normal working hours. So you can't have a command and control economy here. You have to empower staff. That means they have to be confident. And so they have to understand that mistakes need to be addressed, but there's no kind of punishment for giving it your best shot. But most importantly, I think you have to help staff see how what they're doing contributes to the big picture, to the big mission. Because everybody's decisions are better if they're made with half an eye on where you're trying to get to. Because if they don't know where you're trying to get to, then every decision is expedient rather than a decision that kind of invests in where you're trying to go as an organization. And my favorite story, which you can tell in a kind of overly saccharine way, but it's the story, whether true or apocryphal, of the NASA janitor who's sweeping the toilet floors in the NASA building in the mid 60s, and US president's being shown the facilities, and he pops to the loo and he says to the janitor who's mopping the floor, "What do you do?" And the janitor says, "Well, I put men on the moon, sir." And this president comes back and goes over to the generals and bursts out laughing and says, "There's a guy with a mop who thinks he's putting men on the moon." And they say, "No, sir, he absolutely is. He understands that if any of the astronauts catch any illness in the 6 months prior to blastoff, the whole mission can be delayed by up to 2 years. So he understands that a spotless toilet is putting men on the moon." And I think the key at the Royal Albert Hall is to make sure that every member of staff not only understands their job, but understands how their job delivers on our mission. And then, they're extra motivated because their job really matters. Their job is moving this great national charity forwards. They're better empowered and informed to make great decisions. And they feel more connected to the organization, to their colleagues, to me as a leader, because they can all suddenly get this sense that we're all pulling in the same direction. We're all trying to aim for the same spot on the horizon. So actually, a lot of culture building then is about being clear with what your vision is, explaining to staff how each one of them contributes to that vision, and then empowering them within their own roles to actually make a difference on that vision. And I'm kind of tempted to say it's as simple as that. Obviously, that I've just described is not always easy, and particularly not when you're under operational pressure. It's very easy to drop that long-term view and just to make expedient decisions. And sometimes we have to get the show on. But it's my job as chief exec to keep lifting people's heads up to that point on the horizon and keep lifting their spirits up so they understand they're important to delivering that.
Ultimately, they each discovered that leadership is a deeply human act, far more relational than operational. With people at the heart of leadership, another pattern emerges: curiosity. Every CEO we spoke with demonstrated a restless desire to learn, to explore, to reinvent themselves. Curiosity wasn't a hobby for them, it was fuel. From exploring new industries, to embracing technological waves, to following unexpected passions, curiosity helped them navigate ambiguity and seize opportunity. In this clip, Piers Linney talks about what he calls chasing the new thing, not as a slogan, but as a survival strategy. If you're not deliberately chasing the new thing, you're already falling behind it.
And then I've always been sort of investing in technology, media, telecoms, and always for me it's kind of the new thing. So it was cloud technology, it was it's this kind of thing, video conferencing, a bit too early into that market. Additive manufacturing, I'm a chairman and co-founder of Atherton Bikes, one of the world's leading additive manufactured bike companies. AI, we could sort of implement AI. And then through that, really, I was sort of picked up because of my background. There aren't many people who have my kind of background, really, in terms of where I started. I was asked to be a mentor for the government, for young black men and black boys. And then through that, some researchers spotted me. I was a secret millionaire on Channel 4 in 2011. And then I guess because of that, I was picked up to become a dragon on Dragon's Den, which was quite a surprise. I did that for 2 seasons. But the thing is now, they keep replaying it. And during COVID, they couldn't record it, so they replayed the whole lot again. So people who were quite young actually still sort of recognise. So I'm best known for being a dragon on Dragon's Den. But my background, which surprised some people, is that I'm actually a qualified solicitor, venture capital, corporate finance lawyer. investment banker at Credit Suisse. I did LBO's cross-border M&A, and I've been an entrepreneur, really, and I still am. Still starting businesses, working on some work, some don't. Quite a prolific investor. Again, some of those work, some of those don't. Typical portfolio experience. So I've got a very broad background, quite horizontally, lots of different things. And over the years, I've come kind of vertically quite good at lots of them. And I'm still learning.
In this next clip, Christian Mazzi explains why he treated consulting as his residency in business, a deliberate, high-intensity training ground to learn how companies really work before ever stepping into an operating role.
I think at the time I thought about the journey I'd been in medicine and sort of said, I need a residency training program in business. I mean, I'd read the book.
Yeah.
I had never done any of it.
Yeah.
So I thought, well, let me find a place where I can learn and sort of satisfy my curiosity. And like I said, I wasn't sure that was going to be my sort of path for the rest of my life, but it was a good environment. So I was very lucky to have been there in the right time, right place. And that's where it started. And that's how it started. I sort of stepped into consulting, and like many who do so thought I'd do it for a couple of years, but I ended up spending 11 years at Bain.
Next up, Matt Wenger talks us through a connection that's often overlooked, the link between creative arts and entrepreneurship. The same disciplines behind composing music and directing theatre are exactly what's required to build high-performing companies.
So I challenged for the music program at University of Victoria and to go into music composition, even though I'd never taken a lesson in my life. So you have all these classically trained musicians, and I just said, hey, listen, here's a bunch of stuff I've written. Here's some small orchestral pieces. Here's some of this. And a guy named Chris Butterfield was just an amazing guy, and he just looked at this and says, man, it's wonderful to have somebody who comes from a different background, who has different ideas of how music can come together. And so they let me into the program, and then the Dean of Fine Arts let me do a combined directing, stage direction, creative writing, and a music composition degree. And so I got to kind of make my own degree there. To my knowledge, nobody else has ever kind of done it since. And so I just kind of went between these different departments, working on trying to pull together kind of a thesis project that involved music, film, acting, writing, all of that kind of together. And it was really for me, and how that intertwined kind of with the entrepreneurship thing is, it's one thing to try and accomplish anything interesting by yourself. And the beautiful part of that is you have 100% control. But the limiting part of that is that you have 100% control. And a little bit, Dave, what you and I experienced with, that whole kind of think tank company that I had, and I know that can be a different conversation, but this idea of the beauty and the wisdom that comes from enabling the best out of a group of people and trying to, make something from that. And from playing with other musicians growing up and just going, oh my God, like especially my brother, like, that's amazing. What about this? And what if we did some of this? And what if we did that? And trying to kind of shape these things. And then you get all these really wild and interesting characters with, some with egos the size of, the Empire State Building, and, others who are incredibly talented, but don't have enough ego to make it in that space. And figuring out, okay, well, hey, if we got this thing, how about you do this? And how about you do that? And so it just got me involved in leadership at a very early stage towards some kind of common vision, and helping a group come together to kind of say, hey, what if this? What if that? What if we did this? And they have to go, oh, and everybody get excited. And even now, like the hairs on my arm stand up when I think about that process of engaging a group of people in a common, beautiful end outcome that isn't me telling them what to do, but wanting and almost feeding off that reward of what happens when they engage in that. We're all engaged in it together. And that concept is the thing that really enabled, because for a while I was like, like all kind of university students, anybody in business is kind of working for, that's the man. I don't really want to be in business. I was in business because I was trying to figure out how to pay to be a musician, because that's really what I wanted to do, but it didn't pay. And then all of a sudden this thing starts to switch and you start to realize, wait a sec, what I'm doing is almost no different than writing a song or putting on, and it got really close when I was working on stage theater. That's another one I can tell an interesting story about. And that's a really pivotal one. But working on stage theater, where you've got all of these people coming together and you're trying to put on this production, this beautiful production, and working towards that, so it's that kind of mindset that just translated so well into entrepreneurship for me anyway.
It's clear that reinvention isn't a setback, it's a strategy. Curiosity keeps a leader future fit. And finally, perhaps the most human theme of all, authenticity. Every leader had a moment when they stopped performing and started showing up as themselves. And in those moments, real, vulnerable, and sometimes uncomfortable, everything changed. Teams trusted them more, decisions became clearer, leadership became lighter, more natural. Authenticity wasn't a soft skill, it was a turning point. Here are the moments when they embraced it. Authentic warmth has quietly become a competitive advantage. It's not about being nice, it's about creating the conditions for better decisions, bolder collaboration and sustained performance. James Ainscough has seen firsthand how genuine warmth from the top reshapes culture and results.
Anna Lapwood is this amazing young female organist who joined our associate artist program with the joint mission between her and us to effectively try and make organ playing and listening to organ music popular with the younger generation, because it felt to us that the organ was seen as a kind of Victorian contraption that gets played at, maybe at weddings and funerals, but other than that, it's not a relevant instrument to most people. But we have an auditorium with one of the world's great organs in it, 9,999 pipes of Victorian power, literally can make the building shake. And we believe that organs can create the most incredible moments. So we worked with Anna, and she has been phenomenal. She's, through her own recitals and also adding organ to bands like Bonobo and Aurora and many others, she's made organ relevant, interesting, fascinating, and in demand in a way that no one else could have done. Anyway, she very sweetly asked me if I would pop down and join her on the organ stool one evening when she was rehearsing, just to talk about the importance of the organ at the Royal Albert Hall. And I play the organ a little bit. I'm not an organist, but I know how to use the pedals, and I can bang out a Christmas carol or two. And I love playing it. So I thought I was being interviewed, and actually she made me play. So I played a verse of, I think it's Hark the Herald Angels Sing, and then she stuck it on TikTok with someone comment along the lines of, isn't it wonderful that the literal CEO of the Royal Albert Hall plays the organ? And it went insane. So I think we've had 2 or 3 million views of that little 1 minute segment. And look, as far as I can tell, that's 2 or 3 million people wasting their time watching me play an organ. They can watch much better organ players than me. But actually, the lovely thing in the comment section is people recognizing that ultimately I may be a bang average organist. If I'm not even bang average, I'm an awful organist. But the Hall had a chief exec who loved what the Hall did. And at the heart of things, I think that ultimately is where leadership comes from. You have to be passionate, utterly passionate, and full of joy about what your organization does, and desperate for it to do more and reach more people and have more impact and positive influence on the world. That just comes from being a kid in a sweet shop. And I think I'd love to see every chief exec have that level of enthusiasm for their organization, because if you have it, enthusiasm is infectious, and it will kind of drench the organization. And then you have an infectiously excitable workforce who just do the most astonishing things. So I'm not saying that every chief exec needs to play the organ, and in fact they can't come and play ours because it's locked away. But when you're at the top of an organization and you're utterly passionate about what you do, I think that is the start of being a great leader. Everything else then is technique, but you can't fake passion. And those are the comments on TikTok I was most kind of heartwarmed about, that people saw that I wasn't there to show off. If I'd been there to show off at a practice first, they realized I was just someone who had got lucky, landed in the right job, and was grinning from ear to ear. And that the heart of it is possibly what leadership's about.
Are you building a team or just filling roles? Matt Wenger prompts the question of creative collaboration. The disciplines he learned in bands and on stage now shape the way he builds high-performing leadership teams. As it turns out, your ability to orchestrate people may be your most strategic advantage.
So I challenged for the music program at University of Victoria and to go into music composition, even though I'd never taken a lesson in my life. So you have all these classically trained musicians, and I just said, hey, listen, here's a bunch of stuff I've written. Here's some small orchestral pieces. Here's some of this. And a guy there named Chris Butterfield was just an amazing guy. And he just looked at this and says, man, it's wonderful to have somebody who comes from a different background, who has different ideas of how music can come together. And so they let me into the program, and then the Dean of Fine Arts let me do a combined directing, stage direction, creative writing, and a music composition degree. And so I got to kind of make my own degree there. To my knowledge, nobody else has ever kind of done it since. And so I just kind of went between these different departments, working on trying to pull together kind of a thesis project that involved music, film, acting, writing, all of that kind of together. And it was really for me, and how that intertwined kind of with the entrepreneurship thing is, it's one thing to try and accomplish anything interesting by yourself. And the beautiful part of that is you have 100% control. But the limiting part of that is that you have 100% control. And a little bit, Dave, what you and I experienced with, that whole kind of think tank company that I had, and I know that could be a different conversation, but this idea of the beauty and the wisdom that comes from enabling the best out of a group of people and trying to, make something from that. And from playing with other musicians growing up and just going, oh my God, especially my brother, that's amazing. What about this? And what if we did some of this? And what if we did that? And trying to kind of shape these things. And then you get all these really wild and interesting characters with, some with egos the size of, the Empire State Building, and, others who are incredibly talented, but don't have enough ego to make it in that space. And figuring out, okay, well, hey, if we got this thing, how about you do this? And how about you do that? And so it just got me involved in leadership at a very early stage towards some kind of common vision, and helping a group come together to kind of say, hey, what if this? What if that? What if we did this? And then have to go, oh, and everybody get excited. And even now, the hairs on my arm stand up when I think about that process of engaging a group of people in a common, beautiful end outcome that isn't me telling them what to do, but wanting and almost feeding off that reward of what happens when they engage in that, and we're all engaged in it together. And that concept is the thing that really enabled, because for a while I was like all kind of university students, anybody in business is kind of working for, that's the man. I don't really want to be in business. I was in business because I was trying to figure out how to pay to be a musician, because that's really what I wanted to do, but it didn't pay. And then all of a sudden this thing starts to switch, and you start to realize, wait a sec, what I'm doing is almost no different than writing a song or putting on, and it got really close when I was working on stage theater. That's another one I can tell an interesting story about. And that's a really pivotal one. But working on stage theater, where you've got all of these people coming together, and you're trying to put on this production, this beautiful production, and working towards that, so it's that kind of mindset that just translated so well into entrepreneurship.
Finally, the most admirable form of authenticity is radical transparency around failure. Piers Linney argues that pretending things are working when they aren't is one of the fastest ways to destroy value. He talks about ventures that didn't work, the cost of denial, and why owning failure openly is now a strategic capability, not a personal confession.
Risk capital in the UK is harder. There's no doubt about it. You don't have the same risk profile, the same amount of people that are willing to take that risk, and also the same amount of capital, So in terms of venture capital as well, and venture capital, let's face it, in Europe, venture capital dried up after the dot-com sort of crash for a decade or so. It's only really with things like EAS and I'll just raise some money actually ourselves with SCIS from an SAS fund, SFC Capital, and it's only those kind of funds and entrepreneurs that are reinvesting where we've actually seen access to capital. Now, I was on the board of British Business Bank, and that was really there to fix or try and fix or do what it could do to the market inequality, or where the market's not really working. And we have things like the Startup Loan Company. And what amazed me there, the Startup Loans Company, is that there are quite a few brands you know or love that exist because of that program. And the average loan, when I was there, it may have changed, was £7,000, right? So it's £7,000 between starting a business or not. And if you've got the right social capital, your parents, your background, your friends, your family, 7K, you can spend that. If it doesn't work out, you can go again. But often if you don't have that kind of money, you don't have it initially. And if you do cobble it together and it doesn't work out, you're not going again. And in the US, people are a lot more willing to back somebody that's failed. In fact, they're looking for that badge actually, because that means that you've learned something along the way. Whereas, we talk about this all the time in the UK. If you're a failure, you're almost branded with it. No one wants to speak to you. And I think that's a massive mistake. I've had many failures, too many to mention on this podcast, and they're painful. And they still are. I started a business 3 years ago, spent 3 years working on it, raised money, put 3 years of my time into it, wasn't getting paid or anything. You still need income to pay the bills, and it just didn't work out. And you don't want to get out of bed for a week, but you go again.
And how do you pick yourself up in those moments? Because that's a real sort of mental strength you've got to have.
Yeah, I think initially it's kind of you think, oh, dare I raise my head again? Especially if you've got profiles when things don't work out, it's can be quite difficult. But even if we haven't got a profile, it's that you feel like you've disappointed other people, your stakeholders, your investors, yourself, your partner who you haven't spoken to for 2 years because you've been working or missed holidays and bar mitzvahs and whatever it might be, birthdays, and you sort of just feel. I remember Sir Ken Alyssa. I was sat in his office. Something didn't really quite work out, and I was sat there going on about it. And he said to me, "Piers, self-pity does not become you." And I thought he's absolutely right, actually. It's just self-pity. Everyone that's involved knows what we're trying to do, knows the risk, and you were very open about it all the way through, even till the bitter end. And some people even were more supportive when things start to sort of hit the proverbial fan. So everyone's kind of in it together. And as long as you've done your best, you can look at people in the eye and say, look, I did my absolute best. That's the nature of the beast.
Authenticity didn't just make them better leaders, it made people want to follow them. As we wrap up our first year of Pivot Points, one truth comes into sharp focus. These CEOs weren't shaped by grand plans or perfect conditions. They were shaped by the moments they didn't expect. The tough ones, the curious ones, and the human ones. Leadership, as they show us, is less about the title and more about the journey. The pivots that test us, teach us, and ultimately reveal who we are meant to become. Thank you for joining us. Until next time, don't forget to reflect on the pivot points in your own story. They may be shaping something extraordinary.